everyone, welcome to our weekly show, The Subcontinent. We are here to bring light to some of the most important issues affecting the region. Along with an in-depth analysis of the topics and perspectives from regional and international experts, we shall review what key players think and what the common people have to say regarding these issues.
In this edition, Pakistan's High Court has annulled the death sentence awarded to former President Pervez Musharraf by a special court. And anger continues to boil in India over a controversial citizenship law that critics, Muslims and the UN say is discriminatory and biased.
Pakistan's 7th martial law administrator, General Pervez Musharraf, was previously sentenced to death over charges of high treason and subverting the constitution. Now, in a huge relief for Pakistan's self-exiled former ruler, the Lahore High Court on Monday declared Pervez Musharraf's trial in the high treason case as unconstitutional. The 74-year-old had been on trial since 2013, with cases against him centering around his imposition of a state of emergency and suspension of the country's constitution after taking control in a bloodless coup and staying in power for around 9 years.
A special court in Pakistan convicted former President and Army Chief Pervez Musharraf and sentenced him to death on December 17th on charges of high treason and subverting the constitution. That was an unprecedented verdict in a country that has been ruled by its military for roughly half of its 72-year history. Justice Waqar Seth, one of the 3 judges who presided over the case, wrote in his verdict calling for the former president's corpse to be displayed outside the parliament building.
It is not just a verdict against General Pervez Musharraf, but it is also a verdict against all the dictators of the past and dictators of the future. And that's why this verdict is very important, and that's why it is going to go down in a very difficult way for many of the adventurous who are still active in Pakistan's establishment and the powerful military.
Musharraf served as head of the country's armed forces and led a bloodless military takeover in 1999, overthrowing then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. He is accused of taking a number of controversial decisions, including suspension of the constitution in 2007. He also imposed emergency rules that saw the house arrest of a number of Supreme Court justices and sacking of over 100 judges. His moves then triggered mass protests, which eventually led to his resignation in 2008.
Pervez Musharraf is currently living in Dubai on self-imposed exile. This is the first time in the country's history that a military dictator has faced any kind of accountability for overthrowing a civilian rule.
Musharraf fled to the United Arab Emirates in 2016 and has remained in self-imposed exile, refusing to attend court hearings. The ex-army general, however, says the charges against him are politically motivated. He has submitted a petition in Lahore High Court challenging the death sentence handed to him. The petition reportedly highlighted that the judgment contained a mix of anomalies and contradictory statements. The government also announced it would be filing a reference against one of the panelists with the Federal Minister of Law and Justice, terming the verdict unprecedented and despicable. It means that the legal battle is unlikely to be over just yet. The verdict against Musharraf also sent shockwaves through the military apparatus. In a statement, Army criticized the ruling, saying the decision has been received with a lot of pain and anguish by the rank and file of Pakistan's armed forces. Will it influence the future political landscape of the country, or will it have any effect in discouraging future military coups in Pakistan? Musharraf charged with a high treason in 2014 but had been pending for some 6 years. During that time, he had been allowed to enter and leave the country. The penalty is unlikely to be carried out as he is currently living in exile. But many see the death sentence a huge win for civil society and democracy, as it is the first time in the country's history that a military leader has faced any kind of accountability for a coup or a dictatorship.
As the tables have now turned for General Musharraf and further developments expected to come in, let's take a watch on how regional and international media have covered this situation.
The court said General Musharraf cannot be punished for something that wasn't punishable back then. Musharraf was sentenced to death in absentia by a special court in December on treason charges. Such a verdict is a first in a country with a history of army rule. The military reacted angrily. Verdict has ignited a legal and political firestorm in Pakistan. The charges of which Musharraf was convicted stem from the 1999 military coup that toppled Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. The trial was held in a closed anti-terrorism court in Islamabad, and the full verdict was not made available.
We are now joined by our guest, Mr. Imtiaz Gul. He's a Pakistani author, an analyst, and the executive director of Center for Research and Security Studies. Mr. Imtiaz Gul, welcome to our show and thanks for coming. Now, General Musharraf described the first verdict of the court as politically motivated. What do you think about it?
Yeah, it's not just only the former president or the army chief or his spokesperson who called this verdict politically motivated, but a lot of Pakistanis who have been working with the former president, who worked in his cabinet, or who held him in some respect for several things that he did in the country during his 9 years. So now suggesting that his dead body be dragged into the open space and hung there for some time to make him an example is was quite ludicrous, I would say. And I think from the day one, a lot of people took exception to that. So while this indicated a good step that for the first time a former military ruler had been called out and dealt in accordance with the constitution. However, the kind of punishment that was prescribed for him, I think went a little overboard, just because General Pervez Musharraf was not just a pure military dictator. He did a lot of things that eventually helped in the restoration of democracy, and both mainstream political parties and their leaders, they did basically take oath from Musharraf when the 100% democracy was restored in 2008. So now to say that such a person should be hanged was, I think, a little ridiculous, and that's why it generated a lot of sympathy for the former president immediately after the verdict was announced. So, and obviously the reaction of the military was, I think, pretty much understandable.
Now, Mr. Gul, Pakistan has seen several military coups since its creation in 1947. How do you see the scenario in the future?
Well, I think the era of military putches or coups is over for Pakistan. The constitution has also been revised, particularly back in 2010, to remove some of the elements which had been indirectly helpful for the army. And what has happened right now is that the military is controlling a lot of things, particularly the foreign policy from behind the scenes, because there has been a vacuum created by the civilian leaders. There was not enough responsibility. I mean, we call this a decade of democracy between 2008 and 2018. During that, the civilian leaders had a great chance to assert themselves through clean governance, through accountable governance, but it did not happen. And this kept creating space for the military to intervene or influence things, particularly the foreign policy from behind the scenes. So what we need is a political leadership with integrity, which can deal with the country in accordance with the constitution and with a lot of democratic conduct. And we just hope that with the passage of time, we will at some stage get leadership with integrity, which does not fear the military and which is accountable to the people of Pakistan.
Decisions of the Pakistani courts resulted in mixed reactions, welcomed by some and despised by many. Let's see how people around the world are reacting online to this issue. On the other side of the border, deadly protests have marked their ground over a controversial law that grants citizenship to migrants from several neighboring countries, only if they're not Muslim. Critics and the UN say the law is discriminatory and is aimed at marginalizing the country's 200 million Muslims.
India is in a lockdown after violent protests swept across the country against a new citizenship law enacted by the government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Defying curfews and internet shutdowns, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets to reject the ruling party's Hindu nationalist agenda. Critics claim the law threatens India's status as a secular democracy, while the demonstrations have evolved into a bigger challenge to Modi. The Citizenship Amendment Act creates a legal loophole for what the government claims persecuted religious minorities of Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, but not Islam, eligible for citizenship. Under the new law, people from these communities shall not be threatened as illegal migrants, and that they are free to apply for citizenship while living in India or intending to come from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan. It is the first time that India has incorporated religious criteria into its naturalization or refugee policies. Why is it important to the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party? Modi's government views the law as helping to complete unfinished business from partition in 1947 when India and Pakistan were split. It wants to provide a right of return for Hindus, just like Israel did, and has been doing by terming occupied Palestine as a natural refuge for Jews. Ironically, the law advances the Hindu nationalist project. Critics argue that the citizenship law, taken together with a proposed National Register of Citizens, or NRC, an official record of legal citizens, would marginalize Muslims. India's hawkish Interior Minister Amit Shah has pledged to implement the register by 2024 to throw out all the infiltrators and indirect reference to Muslim immigrants who remained undocumented after the country's partition or after Bangladesh split from West Pakistan in 1971.
Dozens of innocent people have been killed in the protests at the hands of law enforcement agencies. Internet was also frequently disrupted in many states, and chaos still prevails on the streets of major Indian cities. This is with an overwhelming sentiment already built through fanatic Hindu mobs lynching Muslims and attacks on Muslim law and places such as the recent court verdict to hand over the premises of the destroyed 16th century mosque to Hindus for them to build a temple. These acts have put a big question mark on India's secular and democratic credentials.
The NRC has been implemented in the northeastern state of Assam, where almost 2 million people were stripped of citizenship, many of them Hindus. The new law would allow them to claim citizenship, but not Muslims. New Delhi has even started constructing detention centers in Assam, sparking panic among Muslims who worry they do not have the necessary documents to prove citizenship. It seems nobody is against giving shelter to persecuted minorities, but not by marginalizing a particular religious community.
So slowly they are progressing towards their Hindu Rashtra idea. But the problem with this is that it rejects accommodation, it rejects diversity, it rejects the idea of inclusiveness, it rejects the fundamental principles on which the foundation of this nation is.
The opposition, Muslims and even secular-minded Indians believe that the move goes against the spirit and letter of the Indian Constitution. Indian Muslims have faced increasing discriminations and violence over the past few years under Modi's rule. Back in August, the administration rescinded the partial autonomy of Jammu and Kashmir, India's only Muslim-majority state.
Mahatma Gandhi believed in the secular, democratic and inclusive idea of India. And Mahatma Gandhi was also linked with Jamia movement. And the Jamia students who are fighting for that inclusive and secular and democratic India, which Mahatma Gandhi fought. And the point is that this bill is against the Mahatma Gandhi vision, because this bill is excluding
Recently, India's Supreme Court also gave the historic site of Babri Mosque, which had been destroyed by Hindu fanatics, to Hindus. Such policies shatter the father of nation Mahatma Gandhi's inclusive vision for India, which is not possible if the Modi government continues to push for a Hindu-first state and treat other minorities as second-class citizens.
Due to the appalling move by the Modi establishment and many innocent lives being lost during the protests, heated reactions started flowing in through the social media platforms. Let's see how people reacted. Now let's welcome Mr. Ashok Swain for his views on the issue. He's a professor of peace and conflict research at Uppsala University. Thank you, Mr. Swain. Mr. Swain, do you think that the right-wing Hindu nationalist BJP government will continue its targeting on Muslims?
Since Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, he and his government has always made Hindu majoritarianism as their political agenda. So it's nothing new in that they are pursuing it, but particularly what has happened after he came back to power in 2019 with a more majority, that has made him much more determined to push that agenda further. So it has reflected in many ways, particularly making a triple talaq law, a criminal law, criminalizing triple talaq, then also going out, changing the autonomy of Kashmir, and also somehow the Ajodhya verdict, which is the mosque has been demolished by the Hindu mob in 92, and give that land to to build a Hindu temple with the help of the Supreme Court. And now this is the Citizenship Amendment Act, which they have brought in. So I think it all clearly shows that the Narendra Modi regime is determined to push its agenda of anti-Muslim.
Now, Indian Muslims have always been asked by the ruling elites to prove their loyalty. What is your take on this issue?
This has been going on for some time, but it has become much apparent, particularly in the last 5 to 6 years. The question is, if you look at the India's Muslim community, it has been always as any other Indian has contributed to India. It has never ever been like it has never shown any sort of its allegiance to other than India to any time. I think this has been a kind of a way the Hindu majoritarian party or Narendra Modi's party, Bharatiya Janata Party, has made it an issue of challenging questioning the Muslims of their allegiance to the country. And I think this is a very easy way of those who are Muslims or any minority or those who are their critics. They have been trying to project them as an anti-nationals or easily putting them that they are not anymore. They don't really believe in the India's as a country. They have their allegiance to other countries. And I think it's a political act they have been playing, and they have been playing quite successfully. But this is absolutely ridiculous to ask for India's Muslims to show their allegiance again and again, because it has never happened that they have ever gone out of their ways to show, as a community or even in individual cases, if you look at it.
Now, attacks on Muslim religious laws and places, lynchings, and handing over a destroyed mosque site to Hindus to build a temple, repeated communal carnage have all become norms in the recent years. How do you think the international communities should react to this issue?
International community is gradually getting aware of what is happening in India. What has happened in the initial period, international community had tried to keep its eyes closed on the hope that India is a rising economy. India's economy is really was doing well, or at least was being projected to do well in the last 4 or 5 years. So there was the possibility of India as a democratic alternative to China in the region. So that's why international community had kept its eyes. Then they were aware of it, but they had kept their eyes closed. But I think gradually what has happened, this is becoming much more problematic for the international community to keep their eyes shut for a long period of time. At the same time, India's economy hasn't been performing well, or at least is sinking like anything. So what has happened is for the international community, there is not much hope coming from the India's economic front or being a challenge to China. At the same time, particularly what has happened in Kashmir and now in the Citizenship Amendment Act and the regular lynching cases, what you have mentioned, this has really opened up a number of criticisms, particularly against the present regime. But I think we must also look at it. The international community is not exactly acting as an international community at this point of time. So to get at the state level, particularly coming out from the leaders, those who will take on the India, that looks very difficult. But at the international community, at the popular side, people, press, civil society, they are absolutely going against the present regime's behavior in India.
The regional and international media remain busy covering the mass protests spread by Modi's extremely controversial decision. Let's take a watch on how they're covering the developments.
The newly adopted controversial citizenship law, believed to be discriminatory to the 180 million Muslim population in India. It effectively creates a hierarchical system of citizenship determined by an individual's religion, reminiscent of Myanmar's 1982 citizenship law. The true intent of this amendment is clear: to move one step closer to defining India as a Hindu nation. Modi's emphasis on empowering India's Hindu majority has raised concerns among its Muslim minority. India's federal cabinet approved funds for a census and population survey that many fear could be used to build a controversial citizens register.
With this, we sign off our program. You can follow us on our social media platforms to stay updated. We will meet same time, same day, next week. Thanks for watching.